today's video, we're going to practice reclined hero pose. Now, straight away, I want to draw your attention to the number of props that I have placed out. 2 bolsters, 2 blankets, 3 bricks, and an eye pillow too. Now, you don't need this number of props, and we're going to look at ways in which we can modify it to make it more accessible. But one of the primary ways in which we do that is by using alternatives for the bolsters. Maybe supportive cushions or a number of pillows that we can bring in. It's gonna be those little modifications that are really gonna help us get into this practice. It may be that you have this number of props, but that is quite a rarity for many students. Second thing I want to touch on, let's get a visual up on the screen of the posture that we're looking at. So reclined hero pose is along the line of practices that we call heart openers. Now, I think the terminology here is key, and it's something I've only very recently changed myself in my teaching and my practice. A heart opener can also be called a back bend, but for myself, I think they kind of infer different experiences, different sensations. For myself, the language of a heart opener is telling me to, or instructing me to go, open your heart, project the heart forwards, open up this space, create release in this space. A back bend, which is the same series of postures, just a different use of language for them, for me infers bend backwards. And that bending backwards can load up the lower spine and put compression in the lower spine. I would say that if we use heart openers as our directive description, it's going to help us really get the good sense of what this posture has to offer. Let's come into our setup. So first of all, to the bolsters. The bolsters are essentially going to add height. And if we add height to the posture, it means that there's less flexion, less compression in and around the joints, whether that's the ankle, the knees, the hips. And if there's more support here and less pressure on these joints, that often means the curvature of the lower spine is a little smoother and softer too. Let's come towards the setup then. So first of all, our large rectangular fold. So the large rectangular fold is going to come where our knees are going to be placed, because again, dependent on how thick your mat is, the floor, the firmness of the mat on the floor can sometimes be quite harsh onto the knees. Now, you can, and I have practiced with others who have done this to really good effect, open it up into our larger rectangular folds. This for most blankets is a 1 or 2 fold. And then here we could have our knees and feet resting onto the comfort of the blanket. Really good option to take. And in fact, that's the option that we're going to choose to use this morning. The second blanket we're going to use as more of a cushioning pillow to rest on top of the brick that's going to go at the back of the head. So for here, we're going to fold it one more time from our large rectangular fold, so we get that extra thickness, adding the height and support, but also the comfort for the back of the head. We're going to place that here to one side. Let's unravel the legs and let's walk the knees forwards so we can feel that the knees are being supported by the blanket, but also the feet. Then we come to our next consideration, and that's whether our hips can rest in between the heels towards hero pose for Asana, or whether this feels a little uncomfortable, in which case we want to elevate the hips. And we can elevate the hips away from the heels in several ways. Most commonly, it's done with bricks. So we would use a brick in between the feet to add that extra degree of height. Now that my hips are off my heels, there's much less pressure on the ankles, but also much less pressure on the knees too. Now be aware that if we add extra height to the hips, that means to create the heart opener, we're going to need extra height to the bolster support too. If the hips go really high and we're using lesser support behind us, then we're going to take our lower spine into a more challenging curvature, an overarch of the lower spine, and that can often bring in the compression of the lower disc, which we don't want. My setup's going to be using 2 bolsters. We are going to use a brick here to create more height, and then the blanket is going to come to form the pillow that's just going to prop up the back of the head, encouraging the chin to drop into the chest. Eye mask is here because we're going to use the eye mask too. We separate the heels, drop the bum towards the heels, draw the bolsters back so we can feel the bottom bolster resting against the back of the body and the hips. Hands walk us back. Make those final adjustments. The chin feels much more tucked in towards the chest, but again that sensation of heart opener, palms turned up, so I can feel that there's enough of an openness, stretch here across the chest, the throat and the inner shoulders, or the front of the shoulders, but also just that feeling of I'm not barricading my heart and folding everything up. Everything feels much more open. And then I can reach down and bring the eye mask on here. So first of all, to the additions that we can make here. As with other postures, we can bring in a greater level of support for the arms. If we have gained a greater degree of height using bolsters, whether it's 1, 2 or 3, then the shoulders are going to be so high that the hands are kind of draping in the air. And then if we have the opportunity then to bring some support in for the elbows and the forearms, as you can see in the image, that's quite a good option to take also. Secondly, our primary modification for this is that we turn it into a single leg variation. If we turn it into a single leg variation, it's really key that we keep the hips square. What I mean by that, if I extend my right leg and bend the left knee, and I can come into hero pose. Now, coming into hero pose as part of a hatha yoga practice where we want to feel a greater degree of stretch, I'm familiar with practicing that, and so being in this position with my bum rooted to the ground and my hips fairly square doesn't feel uncomfortable at all. But for many people, when we take the heel on the outside, they're going to do this. And that's because of the tightness of the knee and the hip. It's not going to allow the left side of the buttock to drop and the hips be really square. And then they're going to come into that lean and then come back into the heart opener, and they're going to be skew whip off to one side. Now, as always, if they feel it's valuable and come to in that position, it's not necessarily going to cause any undue harm at all. However, I would say it's probably better for us to create more stability in the hips. And our way to do that is, again, add more height. If you place yourself up onto a brick, that elevation means there's less requirement for the degree of stretch at the hip, the knee and the ankle, and that lean goes. All right, Jay, let's make our selections and let's practice together.